Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Land and for the NRG Series 10K Modern Showdown. I am Devin O'Donnell, aka Doomwake, joined by Niall Joan Rivers, and we are about to watch round two of coverage here. And we have a bit of an interesting matchup. We talked about this in the in the break. Maybe not the more of the one of the more lopsided matchups we've seen yet, but yeah, as far as round one went, we saw some interesting magic. And what was maybe the highlight for you of round number one?
I really loved the Belcher games that we saw. We got to see multiple times, and we talked about this during the match that Belcher can just kind of win out of nowhere. And we saw these board states from our Through the Reach player that, seemed like if I was up against them on any deck I think I've ever played, I'd be like, well, it's probably over for me, but Belcher's just able to, play the cards they needed, sequence just right, and combo off and win. And I thought that was very exciting.
Oh yeah, yeah. We saw a couple, multiple turn to the one rings, and
Yes.
really neither of them, well,
And
were
those were
really that
both
good enough.
game
Yeah.
losses.
So very, very interesting. Now we don't really have anything like that in this particular round. But before we head down to the feature match, we want to take a look and see who is already qualified because we mentioned that there are players playing for qualification. We still have 7 spots to hand out for this end of year championship. Steven Dykman, winner of last year. We have a bunch of the other showdown winners over the course of the year. And we're going to be seeing one of them, Jonathan Zaczek, who you, for the folks at home, might be familiar with him as Nikachu, to the surprise of absolutely nobody playing Merfolk this weekend. But yeah, these are the players that are currently qualified. Should be a really, really fun tournament at the end of your championships. And like I said, we still got 7 spots to give out. So we are playing for a lot this weekend. So let us go down and head to the feature match area where, as I mentioned, we have Jonathan Zaczek, aka Nikachu, on the fish against Christian Valenti on Jeskai Dress Down. Talk to me about this matchup in particular, Niall.
Yeah, well, I am a fish enjoyer personally. I started Magic in Lorwyn. They've always been close to my heart. I love to see Merfolk win, which is why my heart sank when I loaded up Christian's deck here, this Jeskai dress down list that feels like Nikachu has maybe hurt him in the past. And he said, you know what? I am just going to bring a deck specifically tailored to never lose to fish, and that's what it feels like we have. We have 4 Solitudes, we have 3 Flages, 3 Dress Downs, 2 Wrath of the Skies, and 1 Supreme Verdict main board. And that's really just the start of it. So much of this deck feels like it was tailor made to beat Fish. Now, that being said, I think if there is anyone on this planet who can pilot Fish in such a way that they can beat the deck designed to beat them, it is Nikachu. So, if you love Merfolk, if you love an underdog, this is the match for you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. When we look at the deck lists on paper, it seems to me that Christian has a pretty sizable advantage. But that's not to say that Nikachu is completely dead in the water here, because there are free counter magic, 3 Force of Negation, and 3 Flare of Denial, along with a like subtle mana denial slash, mana change plan, I guess is the best way to put it. 4 Tide Shaper, 4 Spreading Seas, alongside 3 Rashad and Dockhand. So Jonathan does have the ability to kind of mess with Christian's mana. And given that Christian is a 3 color deck, that is possible, if you have Spreading Seas and Tide Shaper, giving Christian a bunch of islands, that could make something like Flage a little bit harder to cast, or potentially keep him off Wrath of the Skies for a turn or two. As we see Christian leading off with an Arid Mesa, and Nikachu, do we have the Aether Vial? I think we do. No, just a lonely Tide Shaper. Not the start you're looking for if you're Nikachu.
Yeah. Now, I will point out Christian also runs 2 Harbingers in his own sideboard. So,
True.
it's a deck that, like, even sometimes he's like, yeah, this is fine. I'll run it myself. Like, it feels so tailor made for this matchup. But I'm hoping we see a little bit of a fish hero here as we are going to fetch into a Thundering Falls and surveil off the top.
Yeah, and for Christian, really just probably looking for some of the cheap interaction, potentially looking for the combo. And this isn't a Jeskai. We've seen Jeskai control decks, right? Jeskai energy with maybe more controlling, with counter spells
Mhm,
and more interaction, like Galvanic Discharge and things like that. But to be completely honest with you, now this is more of like a combo deck, if that's a fair way to describe it, where you're trying to like end of turn two dress down, untap, turn three either cast something like a Flage or a Null Drifter. So it feels a little bit more, Christian just does still have plenty of control tools available to him. But in terms of, Christian against maybe some of the more, the other combo decks, Christian has that sort of angle of attack as we see a turn two second Tide Shaper. That one actually is going to have a target here.
mhm. Yeah, we are looks
Yeah,
like
Christian.
can't really tell if this is on the stack or resolved or
Yeah, looks like we're giving this a bit of a think here for Christian. Presumably, yeah, this you get tight shaper on your screen. It's kind of sort of like a spreading seas, but on a body where it's
Mhm.
you can kick it for an additional mana, and then a target land becomes an island for as long as tide shaper remains on the battlefield. So, spreading seas, but a little bit more easy to interact with. And presumably that's going to be going after the Sacred Foundry, which
Yeah.
Nikachu does point that out. And Christian says, "All right, so no more access to white mana here as of right now for Christian. So something like Wrath of the Skies currently offline." And we also I mentioned that the Jeskai energy slash control decks usually have a bunch of spot removal, things like Galvanic Discharge. Christian is a little bit lighter on spot removal. There's really only two March of Otherworldly Light. And then I guess if you count the flages, those are also there as well. So not as much cheap interaction here for Christian.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, we have the mana for the dress down. Not sure if it's in hand or not. Uh, Looks like Nikachu has a Harbinger and a Vial in hand. Isn't really able to catch much else.
I think we're looking at a Sphaloon, a Flare of Denial, Vial, a Harbinger, and then one card that I couldn't quite get a look at. So presumably doesn't have a land here because likely would this might be
Mhm.
the turn for the Sphaloon. It is pretty funny that Christian passed without playing a third land, but Jonathon actually did give Christian the ability to cast Counterspell, which he didn't have the ability to before. So I mean, if Christian has a Counterspell, we might just fire it off here.
Oh, it's gonna be a consign. Very nice.
All right, Nikachu says, "I'll get in there for 4." And does still have access to that flare of denial if Christian casts anything. But I don't know, Christian
I
missing a land
wonder
drop.
I wonder if that consign is what we were thinking about when the Tide Shaper was
Oh
coming
yeah,
in.
I see.
Deciding if that red and white mana was valuable, if it mattered.
Yeah, yeah, that certainly could be the case. But yeah, Christian missing another land drop, and Nikachu says,
Yeah,
"All right, I'm just gonna keep attacking with these tutus."
that is that is tough. And I mean, even without the Tide Shaper ability, because of where Nikachu put it, I mean, they're going to be pumped either way, right? Because we fetched for the Thundering Falls.
Right. And looks like maybe lining up a copy of Harbinger of the Seas, which is even more, layers of mana disruption, which is, interesting because even if Christian say, finds an answer to the Harbinger, still doesn't have the second, a white source in play because the Tide Shaper would still be shutting off the Sacred Foundry, but just chooses to go for a Sphaloon instead. And that's going to resolve. Wow. And that is going to do
Wow.
it. Christian packing it up does not find land number 3. We talked about how good the matchup is for Christian here, but without land number 3, it gets a little tougher.
Yeah, no matchup's that good when you're stuck on two lands.
All right,
But
so taking a look at the sideboard here for Christian now, we mentioned it was a little rough for Nikachu, and taking a look at the sideboard now, it's not going to get any easier. couple of Harbingers, two Subtleties, a Teferi Time Raveler, a Consigned to Memory, two Surgical Extractions, a Doban's Veto, two Pyroclasm, a Wrath of the Skies, and a Supreme Verdict, and two Deafening Silence. So presumably the Pyroclasms, the Wrath, and the Verdict come in. Do you ever consider something like Subtlety in this matchup?
I feel like probably not. I mean, all of the merfolk just feel so efficient to me that I don't know. I mean, maybe you just want every body you can possibly put into your deck, but I don't know. I mean, really, what all do we think can come out of Christian's deck?
It's a good point. There's not a lot here. The consigned to memories probably maybe some number of force negations. I think
Mhm.
the consigns are well. I guess it's interesting, right? Because consign is a card that you mainly see as a sideboard card against stuff like the One Ring and Eldrazi, but Christian is sort of using it as more of a stifle than anything
Yeah,
to pair with the Flatus and the Null Drifters. So maybe doesn't actually want to keep to board those out.
yeah. It's tricky. It's tricky. It feels like you need a lot of this. I don't know, how valuable do we think the Teferis are in the matchup?
I would say they're probably a little bit better on the play than the draw because it
Mhm.
does turn off a large percentage of Nikachu's like interaction against Christian's interaction and like fighting over counter spells, fighting over Christian's counter spells and things like that. So I think maybe you want them on the play. Presumably I think Christian wants to cut the force negations, but because that one's a little bit more restrictive in the sense that you can only use it on their turn as opposed to your turn. So it's like
Mhm.
not great at fighting over Nikachu's counter spells when you're trying to resolve a wrath or things like that. So
Sure, yeah.
by that. And then for a Nikachu set of things, three Vidillion Hex Catchers. Those have to be pretty good against the all the spells that Christian has.
Mhm.
Three Tishana's Tidebinder, interesting card against things like Flage, Solitude, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Three Subtlety, two Dismember, and four Chalice. So Nikachu does have a good amount of options here. You mentioned that you're a fish and not a fish something like that. But that's a bad joke. What do
Yeah.
you like here for Nikachu?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think something that is a strength of the Merfolk deck is it does feel very versatile in terms of, like there are it feels easier to adapt to its surroundings where, we were just talking about Christian's deck and thinking, like, oh, actually making these cuts feels kind of tough. It feels like there are, always cards that you can just turn this merfolk into this other merfolk that just happens to be a little bit better. I think the Tidebinders have got to be very valuable in this matchup. So much of what Christian's doing has to do with these triggered abilities off of his creatures. So that would be something that I think is pretty big. The Dismembers, I think, are also pretty nice. I mean, it takes care of most of the problematic creatures here. I don't think we need the spreading seas probably against Christian's deck,
Yeah,
but
that makes sense.
but will
A little
be
bit
will be interesting to see.
later on the mana denial because as you mentioned, Christian does have his own copies of Harbingers in the board, so he's sort of prepared to play those types of games where he has a bunch of blue sources. And because Christian is doing the combo, like dress down into Null
Mhm,
Drifter, even if
mhm.
you spreading sees the first couple of lands, like that doesn't stop him going turn two dress down, turn three drifter.
Yeah.
So, if that is certainly something that Nikachu wants to keep in mind here. So yeah, that is the sideboard games. We see players shuffling up for game number two. Now, I got Niall. We said we liked Christian's side of things, but I mean, maybe that game is an anomaly. Do we still like Christian in the post board games?
I think we certainly like Christian. I think Christian levels up more in the post board games than Nigachu does. I also think Christian's deck is still just very well positioned against Merfolk. But, once again, if there's anybody on the planet who can take the Merfolk all the way here, it is Nikachu. So don't count him out, especially being up a game. Like Christian now has to win two in a row. One of them has to be on the draw. And being on the draw against Merfolk, pretty scary. Like they get power out fast, and if you don't have a wrath ready, or if you're not able to cast a wrath because all of your lands are islands, that's a problem.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Christian being on the draw against the Merfolk deck, with if Pikachu has something like an Ether Vial on turn one, there's no prismatic endings in Christian's deck list, so really only has the two marches to kind of fight over that. But we see Pikachu keeping on six. I believe Christian kept seven, and interesting first land to lead off with here for Christian. I don't know if that signifies maybe a mana light hand, or just that's the only blue source available, because presumably you would want to lead with a dual land or a fetch land to fetch up a tap land.
Mhm.
So interesting, thing to point out there. But we're going to consign the vial, so those did stay in, and land go here for Christian. See what the follow up is for Nikachu. I think I saw a Hex Catcher, which is coming in from the board, and I do like that one quite a lot in this matchup.
Yeah, Hexcatcher is a very nice card. I mean, just in general, but being able to use your creatures to interact with your opponent's spells is very powerful, and also a reason why. I mean, from the moment they showed us Flare of Denial, I thought, oh, this is perfect for Merfolk, right? Like we already do this. And anytime I would talk to other Merfolk players and they would be like, oh, I don't think we want it. I don't think we want to lose a fish for it. I would say, how many hex catchers do you play? And they'd say four. And I'd say, interesting.
You wanna rethink that one?
Ooh,
Yeah,
Teferi on three for Christian, and we are going to bring in the hex catcher,
snap it off.
presumably
Well,
sacrificing it.
it's interesting. Do you even counter this? Because I was going to say, if you let it resolve, if Tef bounces the Hex Catcher, you can clear it with the Mutavault, and if it pluses, you can just animate and attack both with it. I guess that would
Mhm.
still be one short. So yeah, just firing it off makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Silvergill adept here. Gonna show a Lord of Atlantis.
2 for 1. You don't
What a card.
see like honest, clean 2 for 1s that often in modern anymore. But Silvergill Adept, one of the OGs.
No third land for Nikachu here. And awkwardly, the two lands we have, one of them not a blue source,
Yeah, so can't deploy the Lord.
which we have
Does have
two of,
access.
I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a second Lord in hand as well. Does have access to Flare of Denial, and you mentioned not wanting to sacrifice a fish for Flare, but Adept is a pretty good one to sacrifice because you at least got the card
Absolutely.
out of
You've
it.
already
So
drawn.
right.
It's already done its job.
Oh yeah. So and I saw it's a fairy for Christian. So if he goes for that, maybe something like Flare, sacrifice, Silvergill.
Ooh.
Christian's actually gonna go for Flage first.
Get rid of, clear out the board. Like this a lot. Looks like we don't have anything to stop uh the trigger sacrificing the flage. So we're just gonna hold up this fetch land.
The
Oof.
second beat of all tier for Nikachu.
Yeah, third land acquired, not the one we want.
Not exactly. Yeah, I think the hand is Lord, Flare of Denial, which as of right now are all uncastable. Something else that might be in can't
Yeah,
get a good look at what else, but
interesting to not attack with the mutable. So I wonder, not sure what card Nikachu has that he's wanting to hold up here.
well, it's also possible that, because players don't have access to deck lists, maybe Nikachu is worried about something like Galvanic Discharge.
Oh,
Because, we
sure.
know it's not there, but Nikachu
Right.
maybe doesn't necessarily know that.
Yeah.
The Henge. We got 3 mana here for Christian. It's gonna be the Teferi.
We'll take a look at this hinge before we decide what to do.
Yeah, Henge is an interesting one. Some of the just kind of control decks play it, some of them don't. I believe it's 4 mana tap. Look at the top five, reveal a historic card, and put that into your hand. So able to find stuff like Teferi, Flage, the One Ring. So and the fact that Christian's deck is kind of more centered around the Flage dress down stuff, it kind of makes sense for
Hmm.
him to play a card like that.
Oh,
Teferi
looks like, is
on
that
the
another hex catcher?
Yeah, so I think Nikachu is debating on Hexcatcher plus Flare that the fairy. That's a rough way to do it.
That is a lot of resources.
I think that's maybe what we're lining up, or maybe just wants to put the Hexcatcher in play, maybe let the Teferi resolve.
Yeah, I
Because
might
then
just be wanting to
presumably,
get it out.
yeah. Because presumably, if the Teferi resolves and say maybe bounces the Hexcatcher, you can mutavault the threat the Teferi. So a lot of things to think about here for Nikachu.
Yeah, it looks like Teferi is resolving. And I mean, we do have enough damage to kill the Teferi unless it pluses. Although if we find a land, then we're there.
Yeah, land would let you have a couple of tutus, so we're just gonna go ahead and bounce. And Christian is, maybe has something like a March of Otherworldly Light, or maybe is just okay with losing to Fairy. And I don't think Nikachu found a land. I think he might have actually found another Flare of Denial, which is not exactly the card he's looking for here. Yeah, Mutavault's going to get fired up, going to threaten Teferi. Christian says okay. And I mean, even if you're Christian, that's fine because that's just an extra card in the graveyard towards that
Yeah.
Flage.
And we have 4 cards that aren't played right now, so it is I mean, and we have a fetch land on board, so go ahead and go back to Christian's turn here.
Yeah, choosing not to fetch into turn. We are slamming the One Ring. And yeah, Nikachu without a blue creature in play does not have the ability to counter that. And that's a One Ring resolve now. That spells pretty bad news here for Nikachu fans.
That is very bad news. And I mean, not being able to find another blue source here, just brutal. I mean, we saw Christian get sort of mana screwed in the first game, and now we're seeing it for Nikachu. Maybe game 3 we'll get, everyone gets their lands. We'll see how the decks actually play.
Yeah. Yeah, and funny enough, Christian actually does have the Minamo to pair with the One Ring. So, I mean,
Hmm.
if you didn't have enough cards already, now even more cards here. All right, looks like we're firing off a Tide Shaper.
Yeah, I mean, gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, that could potentially give Nikachu the ability to hold up the Flare of Denial. Would have wanted the Tidebinder return earlier,
Hmm.
given that One Ring, but is something at least here. Yeah, the tough thing for Nikachu too is Christian at 20 life. It's going to be really hard for Nikachu to sort of just get establish a board state here to get Christian down to low enough life to there's some situations where okay, well, if they're at a low enough life total, the One Ring deals them some
Hmm.
damage, but from this position with Christian at 20, it's going to be really hard to do that.
I wonder if Nikachu put any consideration into tide shaping his own Mutavault.
Hmm, interesting. Give him second blue source to fire off the Lord.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just I just feel like with Christian having as much access to as much mana as he has, maybe maybe it just doesn't matter. But Nikachu has certainly played way more Merfolk than I have, so I'm gonna assume that he's doing it right.
And that's a show of strength here for Christian, bidding that Wrath of the Skies, which, to be fair, is not super great on this board, but that's when you know you're really far ahead.
Yeah, you're in a very good position against the creature-based aggressive deck whenever you're binning your wrath spells.
And Christian lining up some mana here, maybe going for another Flage to take care of the Tide Shaper. Yeah, looks
Hmm.
like that's what it is. And holding up the ability to Minamo the One Ring.
Hmm. And we just have a basic planes on board now.
Yeah, so Harbinger is not super concerning. I guess Harbinger would cut him off of red mana as of right now. Is there? I want to look at Christian's deck list. Is there a basic mountain? There is not a basic mountain, so something to consider. I mean, it's probably not going to come up here, but
Right, and no spicy sideboard basic mountain like we saw with the
no,
Belcher deck
yeah,
either.
with the Belcher deck, yeah. God, Manabo untapping the ring is that is certainly
It's
something.
unreal.
Yeah. I don't have enough cards in hand. This is I mean, Christian has tapped the
Oh,
one ring twice, and it's equal to the amount of cards that Fletcher drew after spending 7 mana for a Seagate Restoration. So
it's wild, and we've got another ring in hand.
yeah. The ring well, see that's the thing now. The rings find more rings.
The
That's how
rings
it
find
works.
rings. Rings beget rings. This is the truth. I mean, eventually Christian does need to end this game, right? And I mean, he's
Yeah.
got no shortage of ways to do it. It's not like in contention whether or not he can. But I mean, Nikachu does get to sit here and learn quite a bit about
True.
what he's up against before going
That's a
into
good
game
point.
3. And another hex catcher.
Yeah, Christian could have deployed the Flage that turn. Maybe just wants to make sure that everything, like the coast is clear 100% before he decides to go for one of them. But yeah, Hexcatcher's going to hit the battlefield. And we are going to untap here for Nikachu. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of any sort of situation where Nikachu comes back from this, and I'm having a hard time piecing it together, Niall. I think this one is as close. This one's pretty close to over.
Yeah. I mean, this is what, 4 damage coming in?
Looks like a Solitude's going to be coming down. Brutal. Okay,
We're
we can
gonna
flare that.
flare the solitude. Now it's only 2 damage coming in.
Mhm. Christian giving it a little bit of a think here. Maybe wants to try and fight over the flare. Yeah, it's always interesting in situations like this. You're obviously as the one ring player, you're massively far ahead, but just doing, you always like to think about how can I possibly lose this game, and I think that's
Mhm.
maybe what's going through Christian's mind here, and just trying to go through all the permutations and possibilities of, if Nikachu has this perfect sequence of cards, how
Mhm.
do I lose? And well, might as well take a look at four more first.
Yeah, why not?
This is like the Uno meme. Draw 20 or not tap my one ring.
And yeah, gonna go ahead and march one of Nikachu's only precious mana sources.
One mana stone rain. As if Christian wasn't far enough ahead already.
Ooh, but a vial.
Okay. All right. We're cooking.
Sneak in a vial in there.
Nikachu's got some action.
Who needs lands?
I know. See if Christian has a consign to memory. Christian says, you know what? I'll let you have that one. That's fine. That's on the house. Taking four. But presumably, Christian, I mean, you got Nikachu tapped out. Surely this is the turn we go for the Flage. You would
Surely.
imagine. This is kind of the spot that you were holding for. All
Yep.
right, there we go.
Blage comes out. Exile 5 cards.
It's going to gain Christian 3 life, making it that much less likely he dies to his own ring. Could even deploy a second ring here if he wants to. But got a million cards in hand, probably wants to, not want to have to discard 10 cards to hand size.
Mhm.
I was gonna say we better be discarding here. There's no way you got more than 7 cards. Okay, looks
Yep,
like it was 9.
and
Okay,
we're
never
gonna
mind.
swoop
Nikachu's off.
up and go to game number 3.
Yeah, see, that's what we that those are the games that we expected, right? When we looked at the
Yeah.
deck lists on paper, that is how we presumed the matchup was going to play out when Christian doesn't, miss his third land drop. But like we mentioned, Pikachu is going to be on the play for game number 3, and Aether Vial deck on the play always got a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we basically watched Nikachu be on one land for that whole game. I mean, technically he had three, but only one blue source. And so many of the spells he's wanting to cast require two blue pips. So really just choked on mana the whole time. So we've yet to really see a game between these two where they are both able to cast their spells.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Nikachu with the double Lord of Atlantis and the Flare of Denial, really not able to utilize any of those cards throughout that entire game. Players looking at sideboards here for game number 3. I don't can't imagine too much would change. I think the one thing for Christian is Teferi's on the play versus the draw. We saw them in for game 2 when Christian was on the play, but I think they're maybe a little bit worse when he's on the draw. Looks like the forces have all come out. And I saw one consign on the board as well. So it looks like those are the cards
Mhm.
that came out for the wraths.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable. Looks like Nikachu making a couple of little changes here between games. And I mean, Nikachu on the play, as we mentioned earlier, that's really where you want to be when you're playing a deck like Merfolk. The the sauce to winning that first game, aside from just Christian getting a little stuck on lands, was Nikachu also was able to deploy threats every turn, right? We went Tide Shaper, Lord, and that was a ton of damage. And that damage matters quite a bit, especially when you are playing one ring deck.
Yeah. And the mana denial plan, even if there isn't an Aether Vial, the mana denial plan probably a lot better on the play versus the draw. If you have stuff
Absolutely.
like Tide Shaper and Spreading Seas, you can kind of like, just let make Christian stumble just a little bit for that pivotal turn where you maybe double spell for Nikachu and then kind of snowball from there. But we'll have to see if Nikachu
Yeah.
has the coveted 7 card Aether Vial hand.
Yeah, I mean if you are a Nikachu fan, if you are a Merfolk fan, you are really more than anything wanting to see a turn one Aether Vial.
Now, Niall, I didn't see a vial in the opening hand here for Nigachi, but I think we have decided to keep. I think I saw a cavern, and I know I saw a cavern. I couldn't tell you much else besides the cavern, but
Yeah, I saw
there
the
was a
cavern. I think there was maybe a Harbinger in there. Yeah, it looks like we've got a Harbinger. Might be a
flare.
Tide Shaper. Got a
Yeah, I
Flare
want
for
to.
sure. I'm not sure what that gold card next to the Flare is.
I think that's the cavern. I think it's
Oh, sure.
Otawara Cavern.
Yep.
Yeah,
Cavern
yeah, turn
Tide
one Tide
Shaper.
Shaper.
We're playing threats. This is the plan. This is how we win.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we saw game 1. The if especially if Nikachu has the second Tide Shaper, just playing one on turn 1.
Mhm.
Even if he doesn't, Christian does have a lot of islands. Although, funny enough, Tide Shaper not the best against Flooded Strand because now even if he has a
Yeah,
second one, can't really cast that into the strand, and
right.
Christian's not going to sack it in combat, so not going to get the extra damage this turn.
Now, what do you think Nikachu named with that Cavern of Souls, Devin? It could be
Hmm.
anything. It could be any creature in Magic.
Well, I mean, if you look at the creature types, there is a good amount of wizards, so that
Could be
could
wizards. Could be
potentially
wizards.
be the option. But we'll have to get a spotter confirmation on what Nikachu
Yeah,
actually
we'll have to
did
get
name.
someone on the ground to let us know
Got to
what did
confirm.
Nikachu name.
There's the Otawar for land number 3, and yeah, Christian recognizing, if I don't if I don't crack these fetches, I'm taking a lot less damage from this Tide Shaper, and it also turns off Nikachu's ability to play a follow up Tide Shaper or a Spreading Seas. So interesting. Okay, we have confirmation from the ground. He did name Merfolk. I bet
Oh,
that's a
thank you,
little surprising.
production.
Yeah.
That was huge. That's the kind of insights we need. All right, well, it looks like it is time to fetch. Eventually, we do have to play spells, and we're gonna be getting a basic island, basic plains.
Interesting.
Very interesting. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, we do not have a basic mountain to fetch. So these are our
Ooh.
basics. Ooh, and then the
Well, is this
dress
the dress
down.
down? Okay. We
Oh,
haven't seen this yet from Christian.
we finally doing it? Are we finally doing what the deck does?
So Nikachu's hand, I believe, is I think it's Sink into Stupor, Harbinger, Tide Shaper, Mutavault, Flare, I believe is the 5 card hand right now. So thinking about maybe fighting over the dress down, I think, maybe Nikachu says, okay, well, you can have the dress down, and if you have the creature, I'll fight over that instead.
Mhm. Going for the basic island is very interesting.
Yeah, maybe he wants to preserve the life total a little bit.
Yeah.
Or maybe doesn't have the red source. So there's a Hallowed Fountain, and there is the Null Drifter.
Yeah, we'll
So
see what
Nikachu,
Nikachu is gonna do here about this Null Drifter.
yeah,
I mean, we're gonna
probably
have we've got the flare, we've got the sink.
Yeah, probably can't let Christian have this one. Um, my guess is you probably just pay 3 mana for a flare, but we'll have to see what Nikachu decides to do. Maybe because he thinks he'd rather use the flare for free on a follow-up turn, maybe instead wants to sink into stupor it. It's a little rough because you do give
Mm,
Christian the extra 2 cards on the next cast of Null Drifter. But if you're Nikachu's spot, maybe you say, okay, well, if Christian wants to tap 3 mana to draw 2 cards on his own turn, I'm okay with that.
yeah. Yeah, definitely feels bad to bounce something with a cast trigger, but as you said, maybe Pikachu just doesn't care, just cares about keeping the board clear, letting his fish get in. So we're gonna go back over to Nikachu here, and that's a Tashana's Tidebinder.
Yeah,
Pretty
we talked
huge.
about there's those during sideboarding. That does make a lot of sense. That one is very good against Christians. Has a lot of, like you said, ETBs. Has things like the Flage and Solitude, and Harbinger is going to be cast here for Nikachu, which is going to cut Christian off of the second white source and access to red mana for now. So yeah, that's actually kind of big. Where now Christian can't cast something like a Wrath of the Skies,
Mhm.
and as we mentioned, Christian does not have a basic mountain, so this it does have one more plains in the deck, so it does have a second plains somewhere. But if it's not at hand, then we're not going to be able to cast a Wrath anytime soon. And past that, really just the 2 March of Otherworldly Lights, and I guess the Teferi's could bounce the Harbinger for a turn.
It would be so sick if Christian had the planes in hand and has just been,
Yeah.
like, sitting on it, like, shocks in the Hallowed Fount, just, like, really, like, trying to bait out this heart. Oh my god, there it
Oh
is!
my goodness.
Into the verdict. I choose to believe he had the planes when he shocked in the fountain. This is my
Yeah,
headcanon for the event. I love
possibly.
it.
I mean, if he did, that is such a sick bait too, because from Nikachu's side of things, you're like, well, I mean, how likely is it he has the one additional planes?
Right.
And yeah, just has it rolled up for the supreme verdict, and now Nikachu. I mean, Christian's at 12, and Nikachu does have this Mutavault. But the land that was picked up for turn was a second Otawara, so this is a little awkward. You could tap the Otawara, animate the Mutavault, hit for 2, then Legend Roll keep the new Otawara to hold up Tidebinder and Flare. But Otawara being the land drop is kind of awkward here for Nikachu.
Very awkward. Taking a look at the graveyard here. Is that 5 cards? This is a tricky spot. This is a crazy game.
Yeah. It looks like Nikachu is deciding, yeah, just kind of Lotus Petal out this Otawara. I think you kind of have to here. Oh, okay, we're gonna hold it.
Ooh.
Tide Shaper, one of the white sources. So I guess the plan is here just Tide Shaper, maybe cut Christian off of a little bit of mana for a turn, and then maybe utilize the Tide Shaper to sacrifice to Flare potentially.
Yeah. It looks like we're just gonna put it on a plains.
Yeah, and even though the Harbinger, or excuse me, the Tide Shaper is on the plains, Christian still does have access to 2 white, lining up 3, perhaps a Teferi Time Raveler here. But also worth noting, Christian without red mana still, so does not have access to the Phlages or anything like that. All right, well, I spoke too soon. Here's the Scalding Tarn. That is red mana.
Yeah.
And the Null Drifter that we knew about. No dress down this time, though.
No dress down yet.
True, could find it off of the Null Drifter, yeah. Although, I feel like Christian probably wants to get a red source off of the Scalding Tarn. So, even if he had something like a dress down here, if you want a shock to get a red source, you have to go to 7 to do so. And 7 against the Tide Shaper and the Mutavaults may be a little awkward, especially if there's a Lord to follow up. Lord of Atlantis
Mhm.
and a Mutavault hit for 6, but 1.
Yeah. Well, and, we have Otawara still, so we have ways to a little bit deal with things on the board. It looks like we are maybe is this gonna be a
Ooh, consign.
consign?
Oh, I think Christian is thinking about fetch shocking to replicate the consign to play around a counterspell. I think that's what we were thinking about.
Hmm.
The consign does resolve, and Pikachu, not fighting over it. But we have the Otawara, and that is uncounterable. Can't really respond to that in any way, shape, or form. So 3 mana. Looks like we are gonna go for a Sphaloon instead. Interesting.
Mhm, mhm.
Null Drifter has Annihilator 1, but with Pikachu having that second Otawara, doesn't really mind sacrificing something here.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely not the worst thing in the world to have to sacrifice your Otawara here.
And Christian gonna go for a subtlety. Subtlety on the Tidebind or on the Tishanas, and Pikachu's gonna fight over it with Flare. So really big stack here. Let's see who ultimately wins the stack. Looks like it's gonna be Pikachu. Triumphantly slams down the Sphaloon. Yeah, now Christian probably, yeah, access to red mana. And that is gonna potentially turn on Flage here for Christian. We'll have to see exactly what we are looking for with this. Oh well, that's a pretty good one to put in the graveyard.
Yeah, that is a very good one to put in the graveyard.
Yeah, I mean from this position, Christian is at 9, so Nikachu doesn't have a ton of damage to deal here, but with this Knoll Drifter attacking every turn and presumably the Flage eventually coming back, it's looking a little tough here for Nikachu. But I'm trying to think of, if Nikachu were to win this game, what kind of draw step do we need next turn?
Oh, that's tough. Maybe another lord, a cheaper lord, like something like a hex catcher, right? So that would make our attack with the Mutavault go for what we'd have a total of 7 damage coming in. Take Christian down to 2, which just doesn't feel like enough.
Yeah, I think it's really going to come down to whether or not Christian has the second red source. He did
Mhm.
play this game without exposing the first one for a while, and may have just been sandbagging them the whole time. We see 3 mana tapped here. Is this a Flage? So it doesn't have a lot of good targets, but just gaining 3 life here, pretty important here if you're Christian.
Sure. I
Oh,
mean, Glass pool, I just don't know if there's anything super
Ooh.
useful.
Yeah, he actually targeted the Spaloon, and this looks like maybe a Pyroclasm. Yeah.
Mm,
Mm. Yeah, so now Christian at 10, Nikachu with the Odawara and the Tidebinder. So I guess you and he did draw the Lord too, so would have had a really good turn if that Spaloon stayed in play.
yeah,
So maybe a little unfortunate timing there for Nikachu. Can hold up Tidebinder for the Flage, which Christian does have two red sources available for the Flage. So maybe you go Tidebinder, the Flage, untap Lord, animate Mutavault, hit for 7. There's maybe a world, but
yeah. It's definitely. I mean, it's not over. I mean, and also this is an interesting lord to get because it is also going to give us Island Walk.
yes, yep.
So I don't think Nikachu's out of it. I mean, the Annihilator one is pretty relevant now.
Oh, I actually hadn't thought about this. Nikachu actually kind of needs to draw land next turn
Yeah,
because with the Mold Drifter or the Null Drifter sacrificing a land, doesn't have the ability to be able to go end step or Tidebinder the Flage, untap Lord plus animate Mutavault.
yeah.
Christian looks like he flipped the Flage over, thinking he was going to put it in the graveyard, and then actually thought better of himself. So we're going to actually keep the Flage on top, and yeah, Christian's going to go for the Flage, which will meet the Tishana's Tidebinder. And this is a big draw step for in here for Nigachu. I think he really needs to find an untapped land, which I
Yeah.
guess is most of them. But I guess what I should say is not the Sink into Stupor, because paying 3 life would be kind of tough here.
Paying 3 life would be tough here. That
There's
is
a
a
cavern.
cavern?
Okay. We're still alive for Nikachu fans.
We are
Although
still alive.
what's funny about this, Nile, is because Christian revealed the second Flage, Nikachu now knows it's on top. So, what you wanted to do is say go land, Lord of Atlantis, animate, hit for 7. But now if you don't block, you're dead because you take 10 and then the second Flage kills you. I guess the one in the graveyard can be escape. No, not quite enough
Sure.
material.
I mean, you could block with the Lord, right?
Yeah, that's true. So say you go Lord, hit for 7, Christian goes to 3. Christian attacks with both. You sacrifice a land, chump block the Flage, take 4, go to 8. The Flage puts you to 3 and Christian to 6. And then you have 5 on the crackback.
You have 5 on the crackback. Any Lord does it, really? Well, I guess you need
Eh.
a Lord that gives Island Walk.
Well, the other problem here is because Nikachu has to sacrifice a land, if we draw Lord, we wouldn't be able to go Lord and animate Mutavault.
Yeah.
Unless you sack the Tidebinder, does that change things? Maybe not.
Mm, I don't I don't think we can afford to.
Oh, I wonder if
Oh,
Christian can just kill the untapped creature.
yeah, yeah, and this is it. Playing the Flage, Legend ruling it. Now the
Yeah.
Flage is back online.
Yep. Okay.
That is game. Very well played by both players. I mean, we thought that Christian's deck was very well positioned against Merfolk. I think Nikachu did an exceptional job playing through it. I mean, we had mana screwed game, and then that last one where they were both able to actually play their spells was actually pretty close, pretty tight. I mean, a couple different draw steps, and Nikachu could have easily had it. So very
Oh yeah.
well played, but huge congrats to Christian. Very, very well done.
Yeah, that was really, really back and forth. That game number three was very, very fun to watch. There were multiple spots in that where we thought, Christian was massively far ahead, and Nikachu still had a little bit of fight left in him to be able to, weather the storm of all of the counter spells and removal spells. So, yeah, very, very interesting game number three. And I believe we are going to try and get Christian set up for an interview in just a moment here. But yeah, as far as the overall match is concerned, that's kind of how we expected it to go, and Christian was able to take it down. So we are just in the waiting room here for an interview. As
I
far
can't wait for
as
this interview.
yeah,
I can't wait to ask him if he had the planes when he
oh yeah,
played the
yeah,
Hollow
that was a
Fountain.
huge moment.
Oh, I want it so bad. I want it more than anything in the world to have been Harbinger bait. I think probably it was one of the, like, 4 cards he drew after playing the Hollow Fountain, but I can believe. Until we ask him, I have a dream.
Sandbagging the planes the whole time. And yeah, that was very, very, that whole sequence where, Christian fetched the basic island and the basic planes,
Mhm.
and maybe signaling to Nikachu that his mana was a little tough, or that he was, a little bit weak to something like a Harbinger. Just a very, very well sequenced and played game from Christian. Yeah, no, as far as I believe, after this we may try to get a backup match as well, but a lot of awesome modern content. We've seen some interesting matchups. Maybe Merfolk is not on a lot of people's radar, but it was interesting to see a master of his craft at work there in Nikachu.
Absolutely. I mean, Merfolk's one of those decks that, a lot of people will write off as like not a serious contender in the format, but the people who really are dedicated to playing Merfolk, I mean, they study it very seriously, right? Like they really try to master the deck and the matchups and everything. I mean, there is a full coffee table hardbound book about Merfolk in the format. There's so much to learn and study, and I think it is very cool to watch someone who is a master of that.
What is going on, everybody? Can you guys hear me?
Merfolk. Here
Yes,
we go.
hello.
Christian Valenti, congratulations on winning that match. That was one heck of a match. Talk to me about what was going through your head in that third game.
Well, we were talking about the match after the fact, and he asked if I had a plan for. Apparently, he had a Tidebinder in his hand when I broke my fetch lands on turn 2 and didn't go for it. I believe I already had the subtlety at that point, so it just would have been a completely different game, right? I would have gotten 2 for 1 early.
Mhm.
Uh, because I would have had to fight over my lands. It's very important to get basics and play against them and protect my
Yeah,
life total with the island even. Uh, but once we got going and I had the Phlagers in my graveyard, I was pretty sure I was ahead, and it was just about tying up the loose ends.
right. Now, I gotta ask because my favorite moment from game 3 there was, you fetched out the plains and the island,
Hmm.
and then the next turn, you shocked in your Hollowed Fountain,
Hmm.
played the Mole Drifter, all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
The following turn, I was telling to Devin, I was like, "It's gonna be so sick if he has the planes in
Yeah.
hand, and if he sandbagged it by shocking in the Hollowed Fountain, baited out a
Yep.
Harbinger." I have to know, did you have the planes when you shocked in the
I did.
Hollowed
Yeah,
Fountain?
yeah, yeah. I was
Oh,
sandbagging it. I was
let's
sandbagging it.
Yes.
Uh, I actually my original plan was so Supreme Verdict is the best card in the matchup against them, right? I have
Yes.
marches in my main deck to deal with creature lands,
Mhm.
or Urza Sagas, what have you. So I actually he when there were 3 lands in play, the Mutavault was not in play yet. The Mutavault was Nikachu's 4th land,
Mhm.
and I actually wanted to hold on to the Supreme Verdict even longer and just have that be basically the last card that I play once he's assembled a board.
Yeah.
Uh, but that gets a little scary. They have so many flash threats, right?
Right.
And protecting your life total is so important because if you let them get to a point where they can just make one big attack and protect it, then they win on the
Mhm.
spot, right? And then all of my extra resources that I've accrued don't matter. So you really do want to protect your life total. But yeah, I mean that was worth 2 points of damage, right? I want to make sure that I
Yeah.
have the plains verdict ready to go.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah.
thought it was extremely well executed, very, very nicely played.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, the other interesting thing that I found about game number three specifically was the sequencing of, Nikachu had the turn one tide shaper, and you just
Hmm.
kind of left the fetch lands uncracked for a little bit.
Yep.
And, that is, not only playing around the tide binder, but also the spreading seas or potential, other tide shapers. So yeah, I thought that was pretty nice as well. As far as the red source is concerned, did you in that game three? I noticed the first four lands you didn't play red source. Were you sandbagging your red source two for future tide shapers, spreading seas, things like that?
My plan was I always had the one fetch land that could get the red source if needed. Uh, Once I drew 2 cards the second time off Null Drifter, my 2 draws from that ability were Elegant Parlor and Sacred Foundry. So I had my red
Mm,
sources from that point
sure.
on. But Pyroclasm, it's a little fragile, right? They can counter it. They can interact with that a
Yeah.
lot better than Supreme Verdict. So it and I wasn't gonna die before turn 4, right? So it just felt more important to cement my 2 white sources for Supreme Verdict around the Harbinger and stuff like that. Uh, Also, I'm never gonna need the second red early, right? My list, I'm not playing Discharge. So
Mhm.
the only thing I ever need 2 red for is an Escape Flage. So there's just not a large priority in getting that into play early.
Yeah, totally. Well, how do you feel kind of going into this weekend? How do you feel positioned?
I
Are
think
you
I think the deck is incredible. I mean, I've been playing the deck since before Amsterdam. I played it in Amsterdam. I played
Mhm.
it pretty much all through Nadu, and I would be misleading people if I said I thought it was the best deck in the format during Nadu, right? That would be disingenuous.
Sure.
But I do think that my energy matchup is great. I think that my Tron matchup and Eldrazi matchup, which are notorious, but historically not good for a deck like mine, I think they're totally winnable. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I like where the deck's positioned quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it
Perfect.
looks very strong and you clearly are very good at piloting it. So I hope you'll keep seeing really great matches this
Thanks so much. I
weekend. And
appreciate it. I'm still roughly chasing the season invitational spot. I've got like
mhm.
42 points, I think, so I'm pretty far down there. But hoping
Just
for a
win the
good
whole
couple of
thing.
results. Yeah, exactly right. That's the easy
Yeah.
mode.
Win both days.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
just win
right,
both days.
no doubt.
Easy.
All right. Well, Christian, thank you very much for taking the time, and best of luck in the rest.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that was Christian Valenti after defeating Nikachu in 2-1. And I believe it looks like we do not have a backup match for you guys. I think the round is just about to be turned over, only about 5 matches outstanding. So, not quite enough time to get to a backup match. But we will be back in just a bit with round number 3. So, do not go anywhere.